Alright, should be making a video. DraftScience presents and such comments, but I'll try to get to some more stuff I wrote, notes and such. Finally getting back to pondering and thinking about things. This takes time to get my time back. So many things to do. Anyway, the William Gelfand. Okay, I've been saying it the wrong way. Do you think space is infinite? Now, I don't know why he's asking the question. I've made a ton of videos speculating, and doing so with no passion, regarding what are possibilities for the form of the universe or something like that. But yeah, I don't know. Where do we get our data from to draw conclusions about where nothing begins or ends, or where the something begins or ends, or all of that crap? There does seem to be an indication that the universe is evolving. Now, what we don't see is we don't see the egg form and then the egg hatch and all of that. We're just seeing it grow up, go from what you might argue is the galaxies were smaller and brighter, and now they're bigger and less bright, based on distance and time, the relationship between distance and time. So that says something to me, anyway. It says galaxies are expanding, not contracting. It says gravity might be less now than it was before, and that's why they've expanded, is because they've collected more mass, and their collection of mass has meant they took all the pressure out of the external universe, and now the universe doesn't have as much pressure. Lots of ways to understand that. Now that process could just keep going, oscillating in this bubble that we call the universe. Who knows? It just has an indication that there's not some continuity. Okay, some things are consistent in the universe and some things aren't. So you have to draw conclusions based on that kind of thin evidence. But why do these questions matter to you? That's the part I guess I'm always stuck with, is we already know that the idea of a creator is regression. That's just perpetual regression. Well, then who created the creator? And who created the creator? And who created the creator? So that's a dead end. That's nowhere. That's garbage. So we know it's a mechanical system, I would argue. It's not a driven system by some controlling force and blah, 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 because then all that controlling force has to have a history. And then you'd have to explain why the controlling force would create such a mess. Why wouldn't they strive for perfection rather than imperfection? All of that kind of crap. So it doesn't go anywhere, this conversation, in my opinion, anywhere a rational person needs to go. We're stuck in a rabbit hole, so to speak. There's some kind of mirror, there's some kind of mechanism that makes reality. And clearly, you could argue, well, there's no logical reason there'd be something. Well, there's no logical mechanism to prevent it either. So, there's no cop that says universes can't create something. There's no mechanism that says what will be has to be something that we can appreciate there being a cause for. So the fact that the universe made something just means that we now know universes can be made, but that's all we know. We don't know anything about how everything works, in the sense of what are how the actual mechanism of creating this distinction between a something and a nothing. And again, you want to eliminate the idea of nothing, which makes it all just something, and then you got to say, well, something again. What's the more sensible premise? Is that something is complicated, and complicated always takes time to evolve out of something. So, I'm just saying that if you want me to answer the question, I'll say, I think it does. There's something all the way down, and as you go all the way down, the something gets simpler and simpler and simpler, not more and more complicated. So that's all I can say. That I think there's not some homunculus underneath the universe. But it's just such a it's such a question so distant from what we can understand and the evidence that we have, and whether we're trying to draw conclusions about the nature of the things that I wrote down, the nature of momentum, the nature of movement, the nature of the distinction between a force, and matter, and understanding how the things interact that we know are things. So why don't we just talk about how things interact and not pretend to know how the things were created? It seems like two different subjects. All right. In the little bit of Thunderbolts projects I have seen, I haven't heard any religion pushed. Well, I'm just saying that you haven't really watched enough videos. So it all goes back to ancient astronaut kind of stuff. They're founded by some Vilinovsky guy who wrote a bunch of essentially science fiction books and tried to pretend they were science books in the 50s and 60s, I guess. And it has all kinds of wacky ways of trying to make religious text into true stories. So we have the sun stopping and all these kind of dopey stories, and they want to make those stories into real events. And they actually have stories like Venus actually did a flyby the Earth. That's one of their wacky stories. But the whole thing was basically based on a creationist theme, which is, let's justify the babble of our ancient history and try to make their fables into reality. That, in my opinion, is pretty much a religion. It clearly has a bunch of feely-goody nonsense in it, like somehow human beings actually did live in paradise in the past, in some Garden of Eden, and they were expelled by science, or something like that. They have this idea that somehow if we believe in their little magic electricity, that somehow everything will be wonderful and everybody will live together harmoniously and lions will lie down with lambs and nobody will have AIDS and blah, 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 blah. And it's all just a bunch of feely-goody, touchy-feely baby physics. It's physics for just fucking infants. It's physics for toddlers. It's Santa Claus stories instead of science. All right. William Gelfield again. Also, last comment, but do you get that the word ether is used by scientists to describe a medium? Yeah. With an absolute reference frame? I don't know, is it? So, fine. Again, you think there's some evidence that there's no such thing as an absolute reference frame. I'm saying you have no such evidence that light is relative, that somehow it changes its nature to the universe based on what frame you're in. I think that's just nonsense. Light always behaves a certain way. And in a sense, Einstein is verifying that, in the sense that Einstein is conceding that the light falls down in the spaceship, and that's why he had to increase the speed of the effects of gravity on light, was he had to make light do the same thing on Earth in gravity to make the two things equal, because of his stupid equivalence principle, which was a stupid principle. Because as I've explained, forces affect things in different ways. Gravity affects your little subatomic bits. A sledgehammer doesn't. A sledgehammer affects your chemical bonds. Okay, it's sort of made out of the same thing. The pressure between the atoms is actually the same force that is gravity. But the point is that it gets through you slower than the force of gravity, which gets through you at the speed of light. And the two forces don't travel at exactly the same speed, just as electricity isn't quite as fast as the force, in free space. Meaning if you're an etherist, you believe space, aka nothingness, is filled with a medium. Yeah, again, I understand that, and I'm saying, what's the purpose of it? What's the use of it? I'm saying, if you want to believe it, it probably doesn't matter as long as you give your space two components. So your ether. So if you want to make an ether, that is, you want to put dominoes between everything. So instead of a thing moving from one place to another, you're just going to make it move something really close a little bit. So you're just changing movement from movement a great distance to movement just little distances. Fine. If you want to do that, I see no purpose in it. I see no reason to believe it works that way. I see no logic in it at all, in terms of, it just seems to me to create a complication you don't need. But fine, if you want to do that, you probably won't break physics. You probably won't. But you have to understand that your medium has to have two fundamental functions, which is you still have to explain where the energy comes from for gravity. So in a sense, you have to make your medium already pre-energized. That means your medium has to have energy in it. That is, there has to be dominoes falling already. The medium has to already be activated. And that all you're doing with your new force is creating some counter force to the force that already exists. Because if you don't do that, and then you have to also create this, you have to solve the dilemma of two things hitting each other and reflecting will look identical to things missing each other. If you don't make any distinction between matter and force. If you make no distinction, you're in big trouble. See, I drew a little picture of it on my notes. So you get the idea that, so it's reversed, unfortunately, but it probably doesn't matter. So two things come into each other. A little force bit is going to interact with a matter bit. And the thing is that inside the matter bit, it hits. See, these little force bits are trapped inside this membrane, you could say. So this is the force in the membrane. That would be the electron or the proton. This is force free in the universe. And so when you have the head-on collision, what happens is the force bit pops out in the opposite direction, and the matter bit inside is now going an opposite direction to what it was going before. So now this thing has the momentum going the opposite direction. So that's a change in the universe. See, you can see the difference because what's in the circle is now the opposite direction. So the circle has changed 180 degrees in its motion, which is an obvious difference between, like I said, if I didn't have these circles here, all you would have is two things come in, two things go out, and you wouldn't be able to tell an impact from a non-impact. But because one of them is in a container, you can see the difference. Yeah. I'm just saying, as a practical fact, you have to meet the evidence, and ether has complications that don't meet that evidence. In the sense, you have to explain how your ether in an atom is different than the ether not in the atom, or how the electron particle is different than the ether particles. And you don't have any theory of that. You haven't explained how your ether, where your ether begins and where your ether ends. And so you're not going to explain, in my opinion, what we actually see in force, which is first that it's quantized, that is, it's clumpy. Okay, there's whole photons or no photons, but there's not half photons. And the clumps aren't so small that we shouldn't be able to detect them. If your ether was made out of photons, we should be able to see your ether. We should be able to detect it, and we can't. And again, then you got the consequences of drag and all kinds of stuff that you have to explain, where I've already explained how drag works in the sense of drag as a consequence of charge. And so big things can evade drag. The little things can't. So the electrons and the protons, they have a drag problem. That's why they run out of energy. That's why their velocity isn't perpetual. But bigger things, like the nuclei of a helium, can have perpetual motion because they have enough constituent parts to take advantage of the charge equation, which is the energy doesn't come out reciprocal. It comes out perpendicular and creates the capacity to create a little engine that keeps things moving. So, to ask these, patronizing questions, do I understand? Yeah, I understand what people say, generally speaking, when they say ether. But do you understand that not everybody who believes in ether believes that ether is made out of dominoes or made out of little bits that are somehow just pushing each other along? A chain of pushing. And so then we're back to push and pull in the universe again. So now the etherists are almost conceding it's a push universe because clearly the perturbation moves in a direction, and we know that the only way waves move is because there's high pressure at one side and low pressure at the other side, and that's it. Moves from high pressure to low pressure and high pressure to low pressure. So we know how it moves. So again, you're almost conceding some of my other arguments by conceding you want to create this ether thing, but you're going to have to give it the same properties, and you're going to be stuck with a push mechanism, not a pull mechanism. All right. Fill with the medium through which light particles propagates as a wave. Well, it doesn't really propagate as a wave, right? So again, we're just going to break language some more. So you say it propagates as a wave. We have absolutely no evidence that you can ever make a photon wave. That is, make a wave front. So we haven't detected any wave front of a photon. All we've done is detect that photons go at specific vectors and land in a location. So you're just saying this is what they all believe. This is all etherists have to believe, that photons spread as a wave front, but it's a wave front in only some kind of metaphorical sense. It's not a real wave front. It's just one where they can communicate with each other with their wave fronts. So and then they decide where to go. I mean, you don't see that as being kind of an extraordinary claim. And you're saying every etherist has to accept that extraordinary claim, where, you know, some etherists might say, no, photons are going in straight lines. It's just little BBs hitting each other, little dominoes, and the dominoes have angles. So you're not resolving anything, and you can't resolve anything by using language this poorly. I mean, light propagates as a wave. We all know that all waves in mediums spread. So show me the wave in a medium like water or anything else where you can make a laser wave. Show me one of those. And then tell me that light's the same thing. And that waves behave like water waves. That wave behaves like water waves. Okay, so now you're into a separate subject, right? You're saying ether means this. I'm saying you're telling every etherist they have to believe that. And that we know that water waves do exactly what I just said. They spread, they lose energy to the medium. They do lots of things that photons have no evidence of doing. The photon has perpetual energy. Waves don't. Photons land in one location always. Waves don't. So I'm just saying, you're using language, and you're saying you're making a credible argument to me, and yet you can't even qualify your words. You're so arrogant and so obnoxious that you can't even qualify your language to say something having some attributes similar to waves, or just narrow it a little bit to say, no, I don't mean it's like a water wave, because a water wave is fundamentally different than anything a photon is doing. Most 99% of the time, you don't see photons waving anywhere. So again, this is just so dishonest. And the only experiment you have that indicate this wave interference thing is the double slit experiment, because it doesn't work in the single slit. There is no, water doesn't do the same thing. And then in the multi-slit, water doesn't do the same thing. So you don't even have anything close to hard evidence of this wave comparison, and you just keep throwing the word at it as if you've proven it with some kind of evidence, or that you have some reason to be this patronizing and arrogant in stating that this is somehow a fact, when it's not. So no, I don't understand that. No, I don't think that's the truth. So if you're traveling half the speed of light, the light appears to you to be traveling half as fast. Appearing isn't what a physicist wants to care about either, right? This isn't what it seems like, or what it looks like, or what it appears to be. It's about what's actually happening. So of course, if something's moving away from me, the distance between us is getting further and further every second. And if I'm moving fast enough, that distance is getting, the thing coming at me can't escape the fact that I'm making the distance longer. And so, of course, it's going to take it longer to get to me, which means I'm going to sense that, oh, it took you a long time to go this far, when, in fact, it didn't go this far, it went this far. And so, of course, it seems slower. But seeming like it's going slower doesn't mean it is going slower. It's just traveling more distance. I mean, you can't see how this is just bullshit way to have a conversation about something like physics. You're going to use this cheap generalization kind of language for something that has to be stated a little more specifically. I mean, again, it seems like that's just garbage as a conversation in physics. It appears. Do you think I'm arguing that it actually is moving half the speed? Do you think anybody who argues for an absolute universe is arguing it's moving half the speed of light? No, they're not arguing that. They're arguing the simple, obvious fact that if you increase the distance, it'll take longer. If you shorten the distance by moving towards something, you're reducing the amount of time it's going to take the light to get to you. Of course you're reducing it. You're going closer. I mean, shit, this is a stupid conversation. To you, to be traveling half as fast one way and twice as fast the other way. So again, it would only appear that way to you, or you would only think so if you were incredibly ignorant and didn't know what distance was. So if you didn't understand that distances can change, or that your distance might be changing, then you might draw some kind of stupid conclusion. But if you had any reasoning sense, you would blame the obvious thing, which is, oh, I must be moving away, or he's moving away from me. The light source, the thing producing the light, is moving away from me. Something has to be moving. When the light goes perpendicular to those two directions. And again, that's just geometry. So yes, the hypotenuse is not the two sides added together. The hypotenuse is a new number. And again, so somebody who just knows a little bit of Pythagorean theory, side angle side mathematics, won't be fooled. Since you say there's an absolute reference frame, I say there's no reason not to think there is. I'm saying that clearly I believe there's a something and a nothing. I clearly believe there's things moving and things not moving. So yeah, I don't know how you get rid of an absolute frame. So I don't know how you do your silly relativity in any kind of rational way, because you might as well say there is no such thing as the speed of light. Because you get to make things can end up in multiple frames and end up having a vector that is in a direction in an absolute frame that I could draw. I can understand what frames you're in. I can dissect your motion. I can figure out you're in a galaxy. The galaxy's moving. The sun's moving. The solar system you're in is moving. The Earth itself is moving. The surface of the Earth is moving. I can add up all your frames. So what are you saying? There's no absolute universe? I mean, you're saying that a piece of empty space doesn't have any place in the universe? You're just saying there are no three dimensions, essentially. You're just basically arguing to me, I believe there's no dimensionality to the universe, no real dimensions, there are no real absolute positions, everything is some sort of amorphous mush, when everything I see, every single bit of the universe I can touch, detect, look at with a telescope or a microscope is saying there are absolute positions. All right, since you say there's an absolute reference frame, do you believe there's an ether? Well, I'm just saying, why do I need an ether? It doesn't do me any good. I'm saying the frog jumps all the way to the other bank. Okay, he doesn't jump on a bunch of little stones to get somewhere. So I'm saying the pressure is the frog. The frog has the momentum. The momentum goes from point A to point B. The momentum actually travels there. There is no, the momentum says to the frog in front of him, I push you, you push the other frog, you push the next frog, you push the next frog. I don't see any reason to create a bunch of redundant frogs to do what one frog can do. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying I see no evidence for an ether. I see no reason to create one. I see nothing wrong. I have no mental dissonance in understanding this is different than the space right next to it. And that in space, there can actually be things that are protons and electrons, and there can be things called force bits, little bits that move the speed of light all the time, and that there can be nothing next to them. They can be something, and there can be a nothing right next to it. No problem. I don't have any problem with that conception. Clearly you have a problem with it, and you're telling me, I just can't imagine that. That's too crazy. I'm saying this works just fine. It answers all the physics questions. This quantizes the momentum. It quantizes the energy just right. It makes perfect sense to me. I just have dominoes that move. You have dominoes that have to hit a bunch of other dominoes. I'm just saying, what's the point? Okay, my domino can just slide from point A to point B. It goes there. It doesn't need anything extra. You're saying you need an extra. Okay, fine. Put your extra in. I don't care. I'm just saying, for you to tell me there's some reason I have to believe in it, fuck you. There's no reason I have to believe in it. There's no logic dictating it. It doesn't provide any necessary function. As long as you can understand something can have perpetual motion, the photon, the little bit of force, has perpetual motion. All the forces move the same speed. I've already explained all this. They're all basically the same, and the only thing different about them is there's electron force and proton force, and the two act on each other inversely. And I've told you those four interactions you can explain the entire universe out of those four interactions. You haven't counter-argued anything. You haven't explained how my theory of magnetism, go to the subject videos, pick one on magnetism, and explain how that theory of magnetism fails. Because it doesn't. Alright, so Superior Mind says, there are absolute coordinates, which is how, why time dilation occurs. Well, the better explanation of time dilation is just to recognize that the motion inside of an atom, or positions inside of an atom, have a cycle, and that I think the processing argument sort of explains it, that if the atom has a shape, and you're going to add a little momentum to that shape, then you'll cause a precession in its roll. And as it rolls processing, the distance each circle becomes is longer. So the number of times it can orbit has to be slower. There's less rolls taking place, okay, in a moment of time, because the distance of the surface of the circle gets longer if it's processing, and that's time dilation. You don't need to do any bent space-time nonsense to explain why there's time dilation with velocity. Velocity changes molecular metabolism. It changes how molecules and atoms roll. The unit forces are the only medium we have evidence of, such as light, for example, which occurs at a frequency and does not exhibit the same behavior as water waves. Well, now he's changing two subjects, but yes, it isn't perfectly consistent. It is not even substantially consistent. It's only consistent in one experiment. Other water wave experiments are not consistent, and you're just ignoring that. Information about the appearance of the light's velocity will need to cover more distance for the light moving in one way and less distance to the light moving the other way. Yes. Thus, the velocity measurements become equal. Equal if there's conservation of momentum, clearly, forward and back. If you reverse it, it'll be exactly the opposite of the other example of distortion. Also, taking into account the matter operates slower at half the speed of light, since its constituents are also traveling further per cycle. So that's the processing circle sort of argument. It's all just about your real velocity, again, versus apparent velocity. We have a real velocity and we have an apparent velocity. My apparent velocity is 0. Right? But I know my real velocity is something. You know, I'm spinning on things, I'm doing all kinds of stuff. And we know that, again, I've explained this argument so many times, but we know that gravity is a real force, that it's really acting on me. Even when I'm not moving, clearly I'm pushing pressure into the earth. I'm denting it. I can show you the dent in the cushion. I'm denting the frickin' earth with the gravitational pressure. So clearly I'm moving. Bits of me are moving. It's just a fact. And clearly some other bits have to be moving in the opposite direction because I'm not moving in the direction of the pressure. I stop moving. So the pressure has to get equalized. No, we get equalized if there's an equal but opposite force that ends up pushing me back up. So in a sense, I'm bouncing in the gravity. And as I've pointed out, well, the bouncing line is a lot longer than this distance, right? So if I'm bouncing and I go this distance in my bouncing, clearly the actual line I traveled is a lot longer than that distance. That's your explanation. I'm obviously going much faster than what I appear to be going. to go over this over and over and over and over. Very annoying. Anyway, so Oscar Wolfenstoffer or something. I don't know. A proud army man of some kind. Space is the medium which contains everything within the universe. It says you. So again, I declare it true. I am the God Nazi man, and I say so. I don't know whether it's a Nazi. It just looks kind of Nazi. And in which interaction and motion take place. So you just declared it. You have nothing to give me as evidence of this thing. You're nothing. You're just saying it. Okay, so the whole universe is maple syrup, and everything is just, I poke the maple syrup, and the vibration travels through the maple syrup to another location, but it doesn't spread. But it does spread if there's a surface, but it doesn't spread really. And I mean, what is all that crap? Again, where's your evidence of any ether? Where's your evidence that there's some medium that has to be poked by something? And again, you still haven't explained where the poke came from. Ether does not explain what makes the earth move towards the sun. Is the sun eating ether? Well, where's it shitting the ether it's eating then? How does it eat ether? Do you have any explanation? So when there's two magnets, what do you think the magnets are doing? Do you think the magnet is realistically, forever, theoretically, pumping a bunch of ether into swirly crap that's creating waves of pressure, and waves of pressure that somehow are attractive to one side of the magnet and repulsive to the other side? How does your theory of ether explain the two most fundamental forces in the universe, gravity and magnetism? Where does your ether get the energy from? The Earth doesn't get smaller by moving, so obviously it doesn't make the rocket fuel to move. The sun doesn't get smaller by creating gravity. It gets smaller by creating light, but it doesn't get any smaller creating gravity. So where's the evidence of your fuel? What did you burn to move? Until you answer those questions, you don't have a theory. Alright, that's why Lesage gravity is so fucking brilliant. It's because it actually has a force. It actually has a mechanism, a reason why things move. It explains why they move. It doesn't say something silly like nothing tells this something what to do. Well, how did the nothing do that? What did it use to tell it? Space is a medium. Okay, I already read that. A medium would imply ether, so that definition seems misleading. Yeah, well, I mean, right. I mean, he's basically just saying it's an ether, and he's saying he's declaring it so. Ether is physical objects, particles, and radiation fields. Radiation/fields. Well, we know fields are different than radiation in the sense that obviously you can have a field and the radiation is active or it's inactive. So you got to talk in terms of your dominoes are flipping or your dominoes aren't flipping. So an unflipped domino would be your field. The radiation is flipping the domino. Okay, so you got to make distinctions. So, but again, what do I need the dominoes for? How does your small movement that you can't account for how it happens? You can't account for how the dominoes fall, right? No gravity, you can't really account for the dominoes falling. You still have movement. So if you can move something this far, why can't you move something this far? And then why can't you move something this far? And why can't I move something this far? I mean, what do I need this stupid medium to do? What is it doing that I need it to do? I mean, it's superfluous as God. It's just a useless, pointless pile of rubbish to stick in physics. I propose a medium is required to contain. It's obviously the medium isn't containing anything, so we have no reason to believe that it's containing anything. And to allow the interaction of the ether in the universe. Yes, the interaction you're saying is the something. The something is the stuff moving. The nothing is when it's not moving. And again, how is that different from my theory in a sense? All you're arguing for is a bunch of superfluous little bits. You're saying the bullet can't get from point A to point B. The bullet needs to hit another bullet, needs to hit another bullet, needs to hit another bullet, needs to hit another bullet. I don't think that's necessary. I don't see any reason why I should believe it. What's my reason to believe? What piece of evidence convinced you that ether exists? What piece of evidence? What observation did you make that said to you, I have to put an ether in here to explain this? An inch, a pinch, the years unravel. How far does thou wish to travel? Oh, he's going to do poetry. I really hate that. The length of something short and flat, or perhaps, I guess this is from what? Alice in Wonderland? I don't know. No, thank you. A dimension, if you will. So that's his answer. See what the last line is. If you much touch, don't smell your fingers. Oh, that's a wonderful, charming pile of crap. A dimension, if you will. So again, more just, no, I won't will. You can't will me to do this. I understand forward, back, left, right, up, down. Now, you want to do something else. What else are you going to do? Time! Frog pie! How are they connected to up, down? Those are dimensions. Up, down, left, right, forward, back. Those are dimensions. How do I relate your other words? Ether or some other crap word. How do I make that fit at all? I mean, there's just no connection. So the Gefland says to Superior Mind, do you really think space doesn't exist? Yeah, I really think space is nothing. And then there's some things that are different than the nothing. We can identify them because they're different. They have substance. And the substance is measured by their ability to convey momentum. If they couldn't convey momentum, obviously we wouldn't know it exists, right? There's no way to know if something exists if it can't convey no momentum. And that's all we have. Now, again, I just asked the question, why do you think I need an ether? What evidence is there's ether? There's just nothing. I don't see any reason for me to take something, the vacuum, and say the vacuum is a something. If I pull everything that has momentum out of it, if I pull all the momentum bits out of something, what do I have left? Nothing. Now, I clearly don't think you can pull the gravity out, but you know. You don't see the difference between an ether and space. You don't see the difference between an ether and space. No, he's arguing I don't see the need to make the universe into maple syrup, or into water, or into air, or into a material substance that conveys pressure by banging particles into particles. He's just saying, I think particles can freely fly, and that's why they do so consistently. It's because they're not traveling through any noisy ether. By the way, why couldn't there be an ether? The argument isn't that there's no ether. The argument, just like the argument against God, is there's no evidence. And I see no reasoning that could possibly defend the existence of the God. He can only be superfluous and ludicrous and nonsensical. He makes an imperfect world. He punishes people after the fact, which is absolutely useless. Who was he teaching a lesson to when he punishes Adam and Eve? There's nobody else to learn from their mistake. There's nobody around to be scared. So he's just torturing things for nothing. I mean, it's an imbecilic notion, the existence of these silly fables. They're silly and irrational. And the argument is ether is silly and irrational. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't make the thing work better. It just gets in the way. So the more you try to imagine how the universe works, the more the ether is just going to get in your way. By the way, why couldn't there be an ether? Again, I'm not making the argument there's absolutely no way it could possibly exist. I'm telling you, you can create your ether, and if you create it with certain parameters, okay, ones that allow for the fact that the ether already has to have energy in it, gravity. Gravity's a real thing. and you have to put it in your ether. That means your ether bits already have to be moving. All right, so you have to do basically what I already did, which is you have to basically create a bunch of photons in the universe that aren't being seen as photons, a bunch of cosmic background radiation. So your ether has to be energized. And then I don't have a problem with it. But that's not what you people do. And again, I haven't even thought about it, but how does your ether make relativity work? Because how do you frame ether? How do you take your functioning dominoes and then create compressed frames of dominoes? You know, where the compression numbers are different for your little compressed frames. How exactly does that work? Anyway, because your boyfriend told you the word sounds phantasmagorical. Well, again, I've never made that argument. The word doesn't sound very... I mean, ether, we already have a definition of ether, you know, stuff that puts you to sleep. You know, chemical compound. You know, I guess you probably should call it something else. It is kind of silly to play with the same word that means something else. So, I mean, yes, you can call it dog shit, but that would be already using words that are already existing. So you probably should come up with some new word for your ether. God, people are so... All right, so Darian Decay. Yeah, I think you're a Decay. Clearly, you haven't read his work. Okay, so this is obviously a yeah, phantasmagorical. I mean, it's a Ken Wheeler fanboy. Yeah, I did it in videos. I've shown his book. I've read passages out of it. It's just redundant. It's the same as his videos. He just keeps fucking... He's annoying in the sense he writes a book and it's got the same fucking quotes in it in 17 different places. It's just crap. And watched hundreds of his videos. So obviously I have, and people have complained that I've made too many response videos. So you don't see the irony of your own comment. You're so clueless. You're the one who hasn't watched my videos. Because clearly, you then watch the comment videos where I'm clearly pointing out how these commenters are complaining because, oh yeah, I spend a little bit of time debunking an asshole. Where he goes into intense depth. Intense what? Fucking word salad garbage. Just a bunch of mixed up, messed up words. Verbiage. He's verbicosity. I mean, there's no drawing of how the universe works. And his drawings, the drawings that do exist, again, I've pointed out where does the energy come for any of this crap? Hyperboreoids, toroids, tornadoes. So he's got all kinds of tornadoes happening inside of a magnet, all kinds of shit moving all over the fucking place. Well, where does the energy for any of that crap come from? How does all that stuff how does it know? I'm supposed to go in a little bendy line around and around and around. You need another force to bend things, you know? I mean, you people are just so dumb. And here you are talking like you know something. You're so fucking stupid. You don't have clue one about the evidence that you have to be consistent with if you're going to make arguments about physics. There's volumes of evidence, of experiments. And you have to talk in the confines of that evidence. And you haven't paid any attention. You haven't done any of the work. And you think this asshole who's going to say, oh, he's a metaphysician, you know, you're fucking insane. You're so petty and useless. Why don't you have the guts to come in this room, you little pussy, and show us how much you don't know about physics? All right. In depth on every single term he utilizes. Bullshit. Where has he explained what a dielectricity is? Where has he ever explained the difference between electricity and dielectricity? Exactly how do they function in any different way? How are they distinct from each other? Because there is no such thing as dielectricity, asshole. GTFO. Get the fuck out or something? I don't know. Grow a fucking brain. Grow a little bit of integrity, you pussy. If you're going to make obnoxious statements like that, come into this, send me an email at at draftphysics.com, you fucking flaming pussy. And let's see how much you know about physics and the evidence, you fucking asshole. talking this shit. Ugh, pathetic. Fucking idiots. I mean, all these people are so fucking underqualified, claiming they know something. Fuck. I've seen many of your videos now. Some I've seen several times. Yes, I've watched a few of them a few times myself. Good videos, mostly. I like your way of explaining how everything is connected. Yes, I'm I'm a reasonable person. In spite of what people say, I'm a reasonable person, and I can discuss things reasonably within the confines of the rules of logic. Yeah, you can't just claim something. You have to argue in defense of it, and your argument has to have evidence in it. Now I have started thinking about what makes an electron negative and a proton positive, etc. Yeah, I think it's something fundamental, so I don't, it's an interesting thing to think about, but it has to be something like, one is concave, which is impossible to make, right? Concave circle. But you could argue that one is a circle and one is a concave square, or some kind of mechanism like that. It has to be something really different where they could have force that they could segregate. But again, the force itself still has to be different, because the same force couldn't be, the difference still has to be in the force. So the real question is, what makes proton force different from electron force? And once you answer that, then you can, but clearly the two things are complementary. One's working, it's red and black, it's however you want to describe it. There's clearly a distinction between the two things. They're yin and they're yang, they're black, white, they're somehow fundamentally inverse to each other, and therefore they function inversely. Anyway, now I have, okay, we already did that. There is so much I want to understand, and it is probably best to begin to understand the smallest particles. No, I don't think so. I mean, you clearly have to get there, in the sense you have to sort of understand the nature of what momentum is, and the nature of what the evidence indicates, which is the momentum is quantized. It's in clumps. So you're stuck with a clump universe, in my opinion. And you're just really explaining how the clumps interact. And so now the real thing to understand is, what's the nature of a reflection? Because that's sort of the key thing, right? Because the idea of what the matter bit is doing is, the matter bit isn't just reflecting energy. It isn't just saying, something hit me, I'm going to send a piece back. It's clearly gaining momentum also. So the action has more than one action in it. The action has, well, here's equal. I mean, something going this way, now something's going this way. This thing had to absorb the energy, so now it's going to go this way. But it's not going to go this way at the speed of light. It's going to go this way much slower, because that little bit of momentum has to be spread across its entire mass, the electron's mass. So, but I mean, so that's, frankly, I think that's where it all sort of begins, is in trying to understand how momentum is transferred from point A to point B, and the mechanism that's doing the transfer. Now, again, they say that the mechanism is, there's something moves inside the atom. That movement is somehow pushes on the field of ether, and the ether little bits convey, and then the new piece of matter over here gets dented and feels it. And again, my argument is that might work if you obey the rules, which is all the little bits still have to be moving. The ether has to be full of energy that causes gravity. But yeah, it's totally superfluous if you can just take the energy itself and say the energy is always moving the speed of light. It can be caught inside of a material bit for a while, so it went in one way. That momentum will always be preserved. It just gets caught inside, which is essentially, you can describe getting caught inside as a circle. Just it gets stuck in a circle. And the circle is equal. There's as much time doing this, is that. And so as it's doing this circle thing, The point is, though, it went in this way, so this momentum is still preserved. There's always one little bit of momentum going this way, so that's always in there. So essentially the circle is processing inside the matter bit. The momentum is still in there. And until that momentum leaves, until that force leaves, it'll have that momentum. It'll have that change in its internal structure. It'll have more bits that came in this way than came in this way. Means the thing has to go that way. It has more force going that way. Oh man. So really, yes. So I think if I was to summarize what the really getting to the core is understanding how momentum is transferred, understanding how it's all just moving the speed of light stuff, and realistically you could say the universe is just made out of stuff moving the speed of light, and some of it's in traps and some of it's not. Some of it's freely moving, which is the force we see going from point A to point B, and some of it is stuck, going in circles, traps, squares, it doesn't matter, traps. And the trapped bits, the trapped force is what we call matter. And the trapped force, the container for trapped force, can have more than one piece of trapped energy. If you start with that, then everything else gets really easy to explain, in my opinion. Well, and understanding that the two are different, protons and electrons charged. Well, I've said it before. I mean, look, the whole universe is just gravity and charge. You understand those two forces, you understand everything. And if you understand charge, you understand gravity. So charge is everything. Yeah. Anyway, no point in me elaborating on what I think when you get to the nature of it. But the smallest bits, again, I'm just saying that you're never going to really be able to nail down what the nature of the photon is beyond just understanding that from any realistic perspective, you're never going to slice and dice one. You're never going to make a tool out of some other particle because there aren't anything else. And slice up photons. It just ain't going to happen. You're never going to see them very well. And all you can do is model them. And all your modeling is, they have such simple properties that the model doesn't have to be very complicated. They're just a quanta of force moving at a frequency with a distance between them. So they're just bullets at a distance. And you can have a length of bullet, a length of a stream of bullets, and you can have shorter and longer distances between the bullets, and it moves the speed of light. That's all there is. And the bullets are momentum. And their momentum is always the same. It doesn't matter how fast you're moving or how fast anything else is moving. The impact of the bullet will always be the same because the bullets only hit other bullets. The matter is made out of bullets going in circles. So all you can ever have is an interaction between two bullets going the speed of light. You can never have anything faster or anything slower. It's always an interaction between two bullets going the speed of light. So in that sense, getting to the smallest bits gets the higher resolution, is understanding that the motion of matter is sort of an illusion. The matter is always moving the speed of light inside. The guts of it is all made out of motion at the speed of light. So anything, any force, anything that's interacting with something we call matter, the thing it actually hits, it doesn't hit me. The thing it actually hits is a little force bit moving the speed of light. So it doesn't matter how fast I'm going, because the little birds are always flying the same speed. So even the ones in the cage are still flying the same speed, and if I hit it, the speed is always going to be the same between the two. That might have gone over some people's heads, but whatever. It's just the liability of attempting to explain something that, it's not that it's that complex, it's just that it does have these components, these little rules you have to write down. It's a push universe, high pressure to low pressure. Things don't move any other way. They just, high pressure pushes things. these, and you just got to compile all these little rules, and then you can start to have a conversation with common vocabulary and with a common understanding of how it's going to move, how the mechanism's going to work, and understanding that on the real bit level, the real tiny level, all there is really is the stuff moving the speed of light. Circles are free. That's it. Okay, so till the next time, and such. I think that's all we got, right? It appears to be all there is. Just update it to see if anything new pops up. Nope, I don't think there's anything in the spam folder. Gelfeld has decided to be civil, so we don't have to fill the spam folder full of his shit. Let's see if there's anything in this subscriptions. AC Motors. Well, that won't be very exciting, but I'll probably watch it eventually. Mathematics crap. Engine tips and tricks. I don't think so. Fractal Woman is all la 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 la. Girly physics. Freestyle, feeling the flow. So this is Scientific Lee playing with his drone, I guess. Planetary poles and magnetic fields. Well, that probably won't be that interesting either, but maybe. Yeah, this is all quite horrible. On connections with robots. Please. I don't know what that could possibly mean. Waves are everywhere. Energy wave theory. So that's the Jeff Yee guy. We are watching this video because of waves. No, we're not. Such bullshit. Alright, so enough. Nothing interesting. Nothing terribly compelling, let's put it that way. So, till the next time and such, I guess. Pretty certain it'll be the next time. That's when I'll be back. The next time I'll be back.